Welcome to the Emerald City Hockey Podcast. Join RJ and Dylan as they discuss each week's Seattle Kraken news and top stories from around the league.
All right, RJ, only 2 games this week, but boy, what a 2 games they were. 2 huge Kraken wins, a +7 goal differential spread out over the 2 games, 2 stellar Grubauer performances, the offense was waking up. I mean, best week for the Kraken so far?
Gotta be. I think it helps just to be back at home, getting into a rhythm, and just being able to kind of get your game going and playing some opponents. Montreal, I think it helped to play them early on as an opponent. But Minnesota is a darn good hockey team, and the Kraken looked just as impressive against them.
Yeah, especially on the road for Minnesota. And, Kraken pulled out that second home win. Of course, their first win at home in that Montreal game. A lot of history tied up in that game. A rematch 102 years in the making, in some respects, right? Technically not the same franchise as the Metropolitans, but certainly the city of Seattle against the Montreal Canadiens. So why don't we kind of start with that game as we break things down? What was maybe your major takeaway from that dominant Kraken win?
It's the speed and transition, and in the second period, and we'll get into the second period being good for the Kraken as a theme here, but particularly in the second period, the transition game was absolutely lethal, and there was a solid 6 to 7 minutes where just every single shift, Montreal, they had the Habs on the ropes, just bringing the puck right back into the offensive zone as soon as it was cleared, and they scored a couple goals on that. Yanni Gourde with a great move around Jake Allen, and then Brandon Tanev getting his second of the game. But speed and transition is my biggest takeaway from that, especially since it's something that the Kraken were working on in practice and we're trying to get better. That was kind of the culmination of all of that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that was the one performance that I think you could solidly say was a full 60-minute effort for the Kraken so far this year. And by the end of that third period, Montreal just looked worn out. The speed of the Kraken just completely wore that team down to nothing through the course of that game. Obviously, being down significantly towards the end takes some of the wind out of your sails if you're Montreal in a situation like that. But yes, the transition game was insane. Just the speed the Kraken were using, they seem more comfortable with that speed. The defensemen seem more comfortable with breaking out of the defensive zone, moving passes up, trying to get those forwards with speed, entering the offensive zone. Let's not try to just enter along the boards and try to, then, forecheck hard, kind of dump in sometimes, right? Like this time it was, no, we're going to enter with speed. We're going to try to score off the breakaway or, try to create 2-on-1 opportunities, stuff like that. All this stuff that you want to see from a good hockey team, a team you are thinking is a playoff contender. That was definitely one of those performances for them. Other big thing was, Jordan Eberle gets his first goal as a Kraken, gets that monkey off his back. First goal of the game early on in the game. I think that helped things. And, he demonstrated some of that more east-west movement that we've seen from the Kraken so far during this homestand that I think has really helped them out. As well as, throughout that game, in addition to the speed, they have more of a willingness to go net front on offense and try to, get the dirty goals. Doesn't always work for them, but it still creates a little chaos in that defensive zone. And I think the Kraken, that's been helping their offense overall.
For sure. And I think you mentioned it, Eberle, that goal early, that just set the tone from the very start. And it wasn't even so much about that they scored early, which of course that was huge, but who got the goal too. I think everybody on the team was thrilled to see that Eberle was able to, break out of the slump, and that just set the tone for the whole game.
Right. And then, it was a complete dominant performance against Montreal, start to finish, really. Against Minnesota, a little bit of a rough start. Got a lucky call for them. Not really a lucky call. The refs made a good call on the disallowed kicked in goal, but definitely momentum wasn't in their favor at the beginning of that game, and maybe a little bit towards the end there in the third. But again, I feel like the Kraken, once they put their foot down on the gas, they really don't let up. And the onus is really on the other team to try to force their way through that. But the Kraken are so deep, the way they can just keep rolling with speed and physicality, I don't know that many teams are going to be able to stop them once they get going.
Right. And, we saw that in the Montreal game, as we mentioned, just kind of wearing them down shift after shift. And you think, well, maybe it's because Montreal's not that good of a team, but Minnesota's a real test. And it looked like early on, it looked like they might go down 2-0, especially, with that disallowed goal where you figured, oh, well, here we go. This is a different kind of opponent again. And it just looked like the Kraken were being outclassed. And then all of a sudden, I mean, they, as Hackstall said after the game, the boys got going. He called that disallowed goal a turning point in the game, but he added, it's only a turning point if you get going. And they did. And it's great to see that also from like a coaching, from a motivational perspective too, that when you have a disallowed goal like that too, it's almost like a timeout too, because they have to review it. You can kind of settle down on the bench. It functions as a timeout without the coach having to actually call the timeout. And clearly whatever the message was, basically get going, worked. And from that moment on, for about 35 minutes of game time, the Kraken were just dominant at that point. They only got 2 goals out of it. I think the Wild were very lucky the Kraken only got 2 goals out of it. But that's the exact kind of play you want to see.
Yeah, it really is. And gives me a lot of hope for moving forward. I do think, as much as I was saying, it's hard for another team to, break through once the Kraken get going. Really the only, danger for the Kraken, the only enemy they might have in all that is themselves. Through that second period against Minnesota, they dominated, just about as much as any hockey team can dominate. Certainly an NHL team against another NHL team. Shots were completely lopsided. Just the amount of time that the Kraken spent in the offensive zone, just how at times, almost incoherent or incohesive they made Minnesota. Like they were just playing to get shifts. You know what I mean? To get shift changes at some points. And whenever you have a team that against the ropes, it should be, you should go for the jugular, which the Kraken were doing through that second period. But then, I don't know what happens sometimes between the second and third period during that second intermission when the Kraken have a lead. Sometimes they just come out to start that third period and they don't have that same intensity. They don't have that same aggressiveness. And, as we saw with a team like Minnesota, if you give them an inch, they're going to try to take that mile on you. And if it wasn't for Philip Grubauer stepping up huge there towards the end, that game could have, we might have seen something similar to what we saw on some of those road trip games.
Right. And to start the third period, for the first 2 or 3 minutes, I will say it looked like the Kraken, came out, that defensive shell wasn't there. They kind of kept the pressure on, I think. But then it went back into the shell. I was about to tweet, it looks like the defensive shell is gone. Again, this is a great sign. And then they kind of went into that shell a little bit. So I almost spoke a little bit too soon. It's something I would like to see them clean up. I want to talk about Philip Grubauer for a second because we talked about the Kraken having, maybe 30, 35 minutes of game time where they just dominated. Now, of course, we know what that means. They've had these stretches in the past. And that means that Philip Grubauer isn't seeing a whole lot of high quality shots on him in that time. And what's happened so far this season usually is the puck comes back the other way. Usually it's a pretty difficult chance to stop too. And he lets it in and it's a momentum killer. And I think it would have been in that game. But so when the Kraken were so dominant toward the end of the second, I even tweeted this out. I said, this is going to be a test for Philip Grubauer. He's going to be called upon to make a big save at some point coming up without having seen a lot of action. And he's going to have to make the save where in the past he really hasn't. And oh boy, did he. That save at the end of the second period on Kirill Kaprizov, off of a Yanni Gourde turnover. And I guess quick aside, because I want to mention this, Gourde was asked about that turnover, after the game. And he just first thing he said, terrible turnover by me, absolutely unacceptable. And I like that he took ownership of it right away. I mean, he wasn't there to sugarcoat anything. He was just took complete ownership, and that's the kind of player that he is. And I love that about certain players. Just they won't, they won't mince words. So when they make a mistake, they know it. They'll own up to it, and they go out, really try to be better, going forward, or have a really good shift, 2 shifts. That's one of my favorite things about players like that. So I wanted to commend Yanni Gourde for that first and foremost, but that Grubauer save, apparently I was looking at the expected goals. Someone tweeted this out that for the expected, I think that had like 0.25. It was like almost a quarter of an expected goal on that one chance, which is I think the highest for any Kirill Kaprizov shot this season. To give you a little context to how good of a chance that was, and Grubauer shut the door on him. And I think that made a world of difference in that game. I mean, if that goes in, it's a tie game going into the third. You know, who knows where the Kraken are at mentally.
Yeah, no, Grubauer looked fantastic through both of these games. He really seems confident. He has bounced back completely from some of those rougher road trip starts for him. The other thing is, going along with that confidence is his leadership, his on-ice leadership, which is something you pointed out during one of the post games. Do you want to just kind of quickly bring that up a bit and let anybody who didn't hear that in on what I'm talking about?
That's right. And I was talking about that, I believe it was after the Montreal game, but you saw it in the Minnesota game as well. And one thing I love that Grubauer brings is communication with the defenseman. And you saw it in the second period of the Montreal game on the Yanni Gourde goal and the Brandon Tanev goal, where it was a long shift for Montreal. They were able to clear the puck out of the zone. It went all the way back down to Grubauer. He stops the puck up, gets it ready for the defenseman. But he doesn't just leave it there. He's yelling at the defenseman. He's barking at the defenseman, telling him that there's a forward all the way up on the far blue line and get a pass over there quickly, and tells him exactly where the forward is. And so the defenseman, without having to look up the ice because he's going back to get the puck, he's able to just instantly fling the puck back without looking because he knows, because Grubauer has told him where the guy is. And it results in a chance for the Kraken. Twice. After that second Brandon Tanev goal, I don't think it showed on the broadcast, but I was watching Tanev. He comes back to the bench, does the fist bumps, and immediately points at Philip Grubauer all the way on the other end of the ice, like, hey, buddy, that was you. The pass coming up. So Tanev knew. He saw where the play started. And I love that communication from Grubauer, and that's just one of the cool things that he brings that, you don't necessarily see that from every goalie, and it's not the thing that shows up most obviously. Obviously, their job is to stop the puck, but he's able to do things beyond that can even help the offense.
Yeah, and that's awesome to see. That's exactly kind of, I think, some of what Ron Francis wanted when he brought in Grubauer, right? Like, that's one of the things that was visible last year from Grubauer on that Avalanche team. That was obviously a very, very good team. It wasn't just his, ability to stop the puck. It was all the other stuff he could bring forward as well, especially with a fast, speedy team that's really good in transition, like in Colorado. His ability to bring that over here into Seattle, which is also starting to develop a speedy transition game. Hopefully we can have similar results.
I did mention that on Twitter, just the Grubauer communication thing. And I saw some Avalanche fans that had picked that up and said, it seems like we've been struggling in transition this year. I wonder if Grubauer's absence might be a reason why. I haven't watched a lot of Avs hockey, but I do wonder if that's what they're seeing. It could be an understated part of his game.
Yeah, and that is one of those things maybe you don't think about right off the cuff when you lose a goalie, that, hey, maybe our transition game is going to get a little worse. But I think there are some goalies out there that would be the case for, and it seems like Grubauer might be one of them. I think the other player, though, that deserves to be talked about a little bit for this week was Hayden Fleury.
Yes.
Offensive juggernaut of a defenseman, Hayden Fleury. I mean, that's what he's been known for throughout his career. Now, I don't know. I've talked about this, I think, during our post-expansion draft stuff, some of our season preview stuff, some of our line preview stuff, all before the season, that I was not a Hayden Fleury fan, mostly because I felt like the best aspect of his game was his shot that he completely refused to use. For years and years at the NHL level, he's just refused to use his shot. Comes to Seattle, it's his third NHL team. He's a couple years into his career now. And boy, is he shooting. Tied for the team lead in shots on goal with 5 in that Montreal game. Comes out in the Minnesota game, leads the team in shots on goal. Or again, ties, this time with Donskoy, with 6 shots on goal. So 11 shots on goal for Hayden Fleury through these 2 games. Of course, he picks up the 2 big goals in the Minnesota game. He must have solidified his spot in this lineup now, right?
Absolutely. You can't take him out of the lineup after these last couple games. And I don't know what happened. It's like a switch just flipped in his mind as far as a mindset of what to do with the puck. And he's just decided to shoot like he's Brent Burns or, like these defensemen who just keep slinging the puck at the net. And it's worked out so well for him. I mean, we pointed this out after the Montreal game where the points hadn't come yet for him, really. He wasn't scoring goals yet. But we just saw a difference in how he played. And then in the Minnesota game, all of a sudden the bounces start going his way and the floodgates open. I mean, he got that sixth shot on goal, like with 12 minutes to go in the second period of that game. And that's, by the way, that's the most shots on goal that any Kraken has had in a game. 6 is like the single game high for any Kraken game, any player. And he got it in the second period, like less than halfway through. So, I mean, he was just putting pucks on net like crazy, but it was something to watch. I mean, there was a palpable excitement there, in the arena for like whenever Hayden Fleury got the puck, because you knew it was going on net. So yeah, I mean, congrats to him on figuring that out. And after the game, he was all smiles. And he was asked, did you kind of see this coming after, how the Montreal game went? And he said no, and then just kind of gave a chuckle, like no. But he must now he must now see what the difference that shooting the puck makes.
Yeah, and his shot is one of the better, pure slap shots that you'll see out there. It's a really heavy shot. If that, connects with the goalie, there's going to be a rebound. There's not much a goalie can do. Maybe you try to swallow it up in your pads somehow, in your chest. But certainly if the shot was low, it's bouncing off those pads for a rebound. But what has always been interesting, and this goes all the way back to his WHL days, is he gets excellent speed. He knows how to leverage his tall frame to get a lot of speed on his slap shot, but he has very precise control with it, and he knows how to elevate it. And that was one of the things that frustrated me during his time in Carolina. Was I felt like, look, you're not just a guy who can throw some slappers there to try to get rebounds because they're low, heavy shots. You know what I mean? Like there's a bunch of defensemen like that throughout the NHL. I really always thought he had the ability to be one of these guys who could just rip one and just blow it past a goalie, under their arm or even over their shoulder at times, because he's so good at elevating it while keeping that control and speed. So I'm really excited to see that. Other interesting thing to note from that Wild game, he had 4 minutes, more than 4 minutes less than any other defenseman time on ice wise. Like,
I noticed that, and especially given how he was playing, I don't know what that was about. I mean, maybe it's the fact that they were kind of defending a lead for so long, and you want to put out, I guess, more defensively responsible guys. Not even that Fleury isn't that, because he's still good defensively. But yeah, it was an oddity. I'd like to see if his ice time goes up going forward. I mean, the Rangers game, we're recording this before the Rangers game tonight. So we'll see if that happens on the back-to-backs, particularly with, guys just needing more rest on back-to-backs. I think you'd want to kind of more evenly distribute the ice time. So we'll see if he gets that ice time.
Yeah, and a lot of games this week too, in addition to the back-to-back. Also interesting if at some point Hackstall, gives him a little bit of power play time too. Just if he continues this barrage of shooting the puck and, offense comes from it. I think that might be something you might see sneak in at from time to time. Before we kind of move on past this, anything else you want to talk about from these two games?
No, I think we covered just about everything. I mean, I guess one thing I do want to mention is the atmosphere with the crowd. I think each of these first 3 home games has been louder than the last, and it's just steadily bumping up and up higher. I mean, this past game was the first one that I felt like this is really in the top end of NHL arenas noise-wise that I've been to. And it was really driven by the fans too. A lot of we talked about in Vegas how like the audio effects were really loud, and that's kind of what drove how loud it was. They're definitely not as loud here, and it's all fan driven noise wise. And so you really get a sense of kind of where the energy is at. And I'm looking forward to tonight, the Rangers game, because it's just been louder and louder and louder each of the 3 home games. So I expect another step up tonight.
Yeah, and it should be a nice, fun, rowdy crowd on Halloween night.
Oh yeah,
I think that'll bring a little extra juice to it too. Yeah, and after these games, 8 games into the season now for the Kraken, a 3-4-1 record, 7 points so far, -3 goal differential so far, but that's been improving. Like I said, they were +7 through those last 2 games this past week. That's good to see. The division is starting to shape up a little more like how we expected. Vegas and the Kraken are on the rise. teams that started off really hot, like San Jose, maybe cooling off a little bit. So that'll be interesting to see. It's going to be a really fun matchup tomorrow night for us, Monday night for everybody else listening, day of against Edmonton, because I think that's going to be, since the Vegas game, their first real test against a team we know is going to be really solid in this division. So really excited for that. So looking ahead, kind of just more broadly around the NHL, try to bring in some NHL news. Obviously, the NHL league-wide news this week was dominated by the Blackhawks sexual abuse scandal news and all of the findings and just everything that came from that. Ended up affecting multiple teams. Lots of information to get through here. So just as a kind of a quick rundown of everything that led to what happened this week. Back in May of this year, 2 former Blackhawks players accused former video coach Brad Aldrich of sexually assaulting them during the 2009-2010 season. One of those players filed a lawsuit against the Blackhawks for failing to adequately address his wrongdoings or filing police reports, really doing anything. That player had been anonymous as a John Doe. This week came forward in an extremely emotional interview with TSN. That player was Kyle Beach. I highly recommend anybody, if you want to know anything about this, or I just think it would be good for everybody to go see that interview, just because you really, it's very, very emotional, but it gives you a sense of the damage that was done here, and it kind of puts more into perspective how poorly the Chicago Blackhawks handled this, how poorly their leadership handled this, how the fact that they didn't really do anything, and how the NHL didn't really do anything, the PA didn't really do anything. I mean, he really talks about all the places he went for help that all basically turned their backs on him. So I recommend, if you can, just know it is emotional. It is a heavy watch, but I do recommend you watch that for some more context straight from him, Kyle Beach. So the NHL, back when all this started, when the lawsuit was filed and stuff, they decided they were not going to investigate it. They were going to let the Blackhawks investigate it, which seems insane considering they were the ones investigating it originally in 2010. They ended up, though, hiring an independent law firm, Jenner & Block, to come in, which was good. And their findings came out this week. And as part of the fallouts, they announced that basically, much of the front office staff, the leadership of the Blackhawks organization, knew what had happened to these 2 players. They knew that both the assaults had taken place, that these assaults had taken place in some instances with threats of violence. Already you have this power dynamic where you have a coach assaulting 2 young members of the team trying to make the roster, right? They're not even on the roster yet. So they're already, feel like they shouldn't necessarily be coming forward, or, you have a lot of negative power dynamics working in their favor. On top of that, he threatened them physically with a baseball bat at one point. So they're worried about their careers physically, worried about their careers from a coaching standpoint. That's how you get this. I know some of the Blackhawks upper management brought up they couldn't see how this could happen, to these big, strong professional athletes, whatever. Well, that's how it can happen, because these players are trying to fulfill their lifelong dream of making the NHL at the age of 20 in Kyle Beach's standpoint, and this coach could completely jeopardize that if they don't do what he wants. That's exactly how this stuff happens. That's how it happens in workplaces all over the place. And we have to understand that isn't just because it's somebody who's more physically dominant. Power dynamics are a large reason of why people feel that they can get away with this. And in this case, he was able to get away with it for 10 years as far as the Blackhawks were concerned. Anyway, as part of it, they found that there were meetings held by Blackhawks, hockey operations staff, Stan Bowman, who was GM of the team at the time, Al McIsaac, who was vice president of hockey operations. They were both still with the Blackhawks. They are now no longer with the Blackhawks after the findings of this report. Joel Quenneville was made aware of it. It sounds like, from my readings of the report that was issued, when this was brought up, they kind of put it on Quenneville because he was a member of Quenneville's coaching staff. Quenneville decided he didn't want to do anything because they were heading into the playoffs and he didn't want to upset the apple cart going into that 2010 playoff run, of which we know, of course, the Chicago Blackhawks won their first of their 3 Stanley Cups in that window there. So that, that really coming out against Quenneville. Quenneville had previously denied it, then later said that he knew about it, but didn't know the extent of it. And then this report came out. That led to him resigning after meeting with Commissioner Gary Bettman. He resigned as head coach of the Florida Panthers. Absolutely should have. He should not be coaching in this league anytime soon, if ever again. And ultimately, the most recent thing to come about it is Blackhawks owner Rocky Wirtz has requested that Brad Aldrich's name be crossed off the Stanley Cup. The Hockey Hall of Fame and the NHL have both, there was some confusion about who had the authority to do that between the NHL and the Hockey Hall of Fame. But they have decided that they are going to X out his name, essentially. They can't remove the name, but they can X out his name. This is a guy, Brad Aldrich, who not just assaulted these players with the Blackhawks, but after he was basically talked into resigning after that playoff run, went to coach college hockey at Miami University, Miami of Ohio, assaulted multiple players there, is let go from there, again, without any, police involvement, anything like that. He assaults players and interns there, and then goes to a high school where, he was accused and convicted of sexual assaults of minors. I don't know why at that point his name wasn't taken off the Stanley Cup. At that point, why, the NHL didn't maybe revisit some of the things that the 2 Blackhawks players had brought up at the time, why the Chicago Blackhawks didn't decide to revisit any of those things. But that's kind of the lowdown of everything that happened this week. It's, I feel pretty good about, guys like Stan Bowman, Al McIsaac, Joel Quenneville not having jobs anymore after those findings, of them knowing about it and making that decision to we'll just keep going through this playoffs. Let's try to just focus on winning the Stanley Cup and maybe we'll deal with it later. I think that's absolutely the worst way to handle a situation like this. Do you have any thoughts, RJ?
No, I'm absolutely. I mean, I have to agree. It's just a shame how Kyle Beach he did all the things you're supposed to do. He went and reported it right away to multiple people. I mean, this is exactly how you're supposed to handle something like this. And just at turn after turn, he was failed by the people who were supposed to be protecting him. And it's just awful to hear about. I watched that whole interview again. I would also recommend that you watch it if you feel that you can do that, because it is a very emotional watch. It was very difficult to watch, but it was so important that what he did and what he said, and I have to admire that bravery too, because hopefully this is going to help create a better situation in the future so that this doesn't this is prevented from happening again. Yeah, I have no issue with the people who who allowed this to happen, who failed him at every turn, being out of jobs.
Yeah. I guess the one other person that met with Bettman, who it's a little more unclear what his role in anything was current Winnipeg Jets GM Kevin Cheveldayoff. After the meeting with Gary Bettman said basically that he wasn't really involved and he wasn't really aware of what was going on, so he didn't feel that it was necessary to take, to administer any punishment to Cheveldayoff. I guess we'll just have to trust on that one. He wasn't as senior in any of the leadership as all of these other people, so I guess that is possible. But yeah, I mean, it's a really rough situation for all involved. And what's so frustrating for me is, and this is something I feel like all sports is getting better about as time moves on, as we get further and further into this century, and I feel like it's going to be one of the big things of this decade for sports in general, is realizing that the players are the product, and that for for really all of time, the organizations have always been kind of the thing that we view, right? And they feel like the organization is more important than any player. It's more important than the people involved within the organization, whether that's coaches, management, players, all that stuff. It's, it's the classic protect the shield if you're the NFL and all that stuff. But I do feel like the tide is turning as we are slowly, finally realizing that all of these players, all of these coaches, all of these people in management, all these league officials, everybody, they are human beings. And there are some things that human beings should not have to put up with in a workspace, regardless of what the job is, regardless of how much money they make, regardless of anything. And I feel like, this is a big opportunity for the NHL to learn that lesson. I commend Kyle Beach for coming forward and really putting this at center stage. I think it's, once again, unfortunate. A lot of times for the NHL, this is their exposure to most sports fans, right? For years, that was, one of the things we always talked about, right? The NHL never made SportsCenter or anything unless it was something bad, right? ESPN didn't have the rights to them. Nobody, cared or whatever. And I do feel like there's a good, there was a good 10-year stretch where this was really all people saw from the NHL. And just as the, ESPN is getting the NHL rights back, they're really making a push to show the NHL to all these sports fans that kind of haven't really seen it for a while, and promote this product, a sport that, all of us, recording this or listening to it know to be one of the best sports out there. And to have this happen and have this come out, and how poorly the PA handled it, certainly how poorly the Blackhawks handled it, how all of these systems failed this player, it's so unfortunate, as I felt like the NHL was finally starting to gain some momentum certainly in the US as far as mainstream sports goes. But yeah, I just think it's about time we kind of realize we're seeing that too with the Jack Eichel situation. Obviously it's a very different situation, but at the end of the day, he's standing up. He's one of the first hockey players to stand up and say, hey, this is my body. We're talking about a pretty serious medical situation as far as it being a neck injury that could impact not just his playing career, but his life, the rest of his life. He's, only 24, and he's saying, I want to handle it the way I want to handle it. And the Sabres are saying, well, we want to handle it the way we want to handle it because, you signed a contract with us, and in a lot of ways we, they don't own him, but they have significant say over his body, and he's really trying to take a stand on that. And I think that, we should let players take stands on stuff like that. We should let them be their own advocates when things affect them. And I do think this is another example of that. The team did not want to protect this human being. They felt it was more important to win the Stanley Cup. And obviously the fallout from that decision was very significant. And, not only does it result in these people losing their jobs later on, but it, irreparably changed Kyle Beach's life to the point where only now is he really getting to a point where maybe as all of this is coming to light and things are moving forward, that he can, start a healing process for something that, has been going on for over a decade and really robbed him of his dream. So, not the most pleasant of conversations to have, but something that needed to be had because it is just the most dominant story in all of hockey. It'll be interesting to see how things play out from here. I do think this is the last we'll hear from it for a while as everything just moves forward legally from here on out. Otherwise, throughout the NHL, not too many big storylines from this past week, would you say, RJ?
No, I think you've seen basically teams, kind of go back closer to where, we thought they would be. Some of the hot starts cooled down. Some of the bad starts got a little better. I think we're starting to just see things come together, and it's still early in the season. So that was definitely kind of the main storyline.
Yeah, not even, a full, eighth of the way through the season yet. Yep. Nobody's reached double digits. Yeah, Connor McDavid leading the league in points. We knew that was going to happen. Ovechkin scoring goals like nobody's business as he tries to get to Gretzky's mark. That's pretty exciting. But
let's hope. I want to see that.
Yeah, I think we all do. But we'll go ahead and move on now to our mailbag section of this week. It's been a while since we've done this on the podcast, RJ. since we've had Mailbag segment. We got some good questions from all of our listeners. Why don't you get us started?
Yeah, and we'll start. You mentioned Connor McDavid leading the NHL in scoring again. We all knew that was going to happen. And I guess we'll start with a question from Robert on Twitter. How do we stop Connor McDavid on Monday?
I mean, short answer is you don't. Like,
Well, yeah, you can't stop Connor McDavid. You can only hope to contain him. But how do the Kraken contain him?
It's hard. I would say look back to the playoffs last year. I thought I'm oh my gosh, I'm totally spacing. Who knocked Edmonton out of the playoffs last year?
It was Winnipeg, I believe.
Yeah, it was, and they did a really good job slowing him down throughout that series. And it was basically through just trying to double, triple team him whenever he has the puck. Really try to suffocate him. Put all the pressure on Connor's line mates to make things happen instead of him. And they weren't able to get it done without McDavid really there. So I guess that's what I would do, is just try to kind of suffocate his space. Don't let him build up speed, because that's really how he gets you. Obviously the transitions are hard. I think maybe if you play aggressive along the blue lines, yeah, sometimes it might not work, but we saw that from the Kraken in some of those games at the beginning of the season where they really tried to stand tough at the blue line. That might be possible given the reach some of these blue liners have, but I don't know.
Yeah, you definitely want to be careful if you're a defenseman about when to pinch in, when to, not leave a whole lot of space. Yeah, that's one thing to focus on. Personally, I mean, the only other thing, I guess you can't, you're not at home, so you can't worry about matchups. I mean, that's what's going to be so tough is, if I was at home, I'd try and get the Yanni Gord line on him a bit more. We saw Gord, Yarncroke, and Tanev do a fantastic job shutting down Kirill Kaprizov in the Wild game. And I think that's probably the guys you want to have on the ice against McDavid. But not being at home, they're not really going to have that option. So, yeah, I think just try and suffocate his space. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Next question from Nathan. Who has given you more than you expected, about what you expected, and who do the Kraken need to see more from? So, I mean, we could, take the larger exercise of sorting every player into those three categories, but I think we should just each name one from each category that we think. And I'll go first. As far as who's given me more than I expected, Brandon Tanev is the first name that comes to mind. There are certain things that we know he brings defensively, energy-wise. I don't think any of us saw 6 goals happening, leading the team in goal scoring. I certainly didn't. So that would be the player I think gives more than I expected. About what I expected, it's tough because there are a lot of players you kind of known commodities. They've done as advertised. I'd probably think of the one that I would think the most though is probably Philip Grubauer. We know what he's a great goaltender. We know he's just basically brought it every single night, and yeah, I'd say he's probably given as expected. And he's he's had a few rough stretches too, but what goalie doesn't? So I think that's probably what I've expected from him. And as far as the player that I want to see more from, probably Mason Appleton. And not because I think he's been the worst per se, but because his ceiling is so much higher, I think, than what we've seen so far. I mean, he's injured right now. We don't know when he's going to be back. But when he does come back, I think it might be a good way to almost kind of clean slate and just go from there. So Appleton, I'd like to see more from. What do you think, Dylan?
Yeah, I like Turbo as the guy who's, given a little more. Obviously, he's won off his goal total from all of last season already. So you could definitely say he's been a little bit of an offensive surprise. I'm going to stick with Hayden Fleury, though, because I think he was borderline to be on this team. Obviously was borderline to be on this team into the season starting. But if he continues this run that we talked about earlier, I mean, he could be a really dominant force for this team and be a big reason why they not only make the playoffs, but maybe, make some things happen in the playoffs. So I'm going to say Hayden Fleury. Granted, it's a small sample size. As far as players getting what we've expected, I want to say Adam Larson just because he's my boy. I'm going to go ahead and say Yanni Gord, though. I think we knew he was going to come in. He was going to bring passion. He was going to bring energy. He was going to bring on-ice leadership. And he's going to bring that solid two-way game. We see him back-checking back behind the goal line in the defensive zone. He back-checks all the way, plays that full 200-foot game. He knows how to use speed and creativity in the offensive zone, and we've seen that from his game so far this year. So I think Yanni Gourde's bringing, we had high expectations for him, and he is living up to those high expectations. And as far as guys I want to see a little bit more from, as much as I want to say, like, just Will Borgen, like I just want to see him in general. That's really more of a Hackstall thing than anything else. I might kind of split it between Jaden Schwartz and Jordan Eberle. They both have had some offensive struggles so far this year. I've felt like at times with Jaden Schwartz, he's maybe not quite settled into what his role is offensively, as far as should he be a net front guy? Should he be trying to make things happen, maybe behind the net? There are just some games where he doesn't quite know where he's fitting in this current, like, Kraken system. And then as far as Eberle goes, there were just some games where it just, he didn't seem to want it offensively. He wasn't really taking shots where I thought he should be taking shots. Like, have that shooter mentality, have that goal scorer mentality where you're going to, be taking 7 shots a game, and knowing that, at some point one will go in. And I feel like some of that was missing. He's bouncing back from that though lately since the homestand started, but I think those would be the two guys that, I think we all kind of expected a little more from.
Agreed. I think those are some good picks. You had a few of my backup picks on that. Next question from Brian, and I like this one. It's a fun exercise. So he says, just for fun, if Arizona or any other team were to fold and a new team were to take their place, but using the expansion draft, who would you protect on the Kraken? So already turning around just after the expansion draft, and assuming there's another one, and because, of course, the Kraken don't get the special treatment like Vegas did, the Kraken are eligible to have a player selected in the expansion draft. Figure out, okay, what players are the Kraken protecting? Now, I think we've got to go with the 7-3-1 protection option. I think that's probably the way to go to start with. At goalie,
I was gonna say I would agree with that, just because normally you'd want to say, well, they got tons of great defensemen and go 4-4, but you're only going to lose one of these defensemen, so you don't have to worry about that too much.
Exactly. I guess we'll start in net. That's probably the easiest one to protect. You got to protect Philip Grubauer.
Yeah.
As good a goalie as Chris Drieger is, got to protect Grubauer. So onto the defense. You got to select 3 defensemen to protect, and this is probably the hardest choice to make. I think you've got to go with Alexiak as one of them. Agreed?
Yeah.
No?
I was gonna say, for me, the
Larson, who's the most
Larson's the most shoe-in. Dunn is second, and then I do think Alexiak, but I don't know that he would be a total lock.
Okay. So yeah, I had Alexiak, Larson, and Dunn as my 3. If not Alexiak, are you thinking Hayden Fleury? Obviously we've got to talk about Giordano. He's the captain. He's doing so much. But for the same reason the Flames didn't protect him, he's just got 1 year left on that deal. He's older. It's a tougher pick for another team to make. But the Kraken did it, so.
Yeah, in this scenario you're talking about next offseason, he'll be 39. He's going to be a free agent. So yeah, there's not really a point in protecting him, just like there wasn't for Calgary.
Yep. So those would be the 3 defensemen I think we can agree on. The forwards, there's a little more guesswork here. I think you've got to, obviously, Yanni Gourde for sure. Schwartz and Eberle, as much as we said we'd like to see more from them, got to be in the top 7. Yep. Brandon Tanev for sure. Cannot let him go. Jared McCann would be another one I think you'd want to protect. That leaves 2 forward spots for debate. And for me, I'll start with my 2 that I went with. I went with Morgan Geekie and Mason Appleton. Now, that might be a little controversial. I think you're going to disagree with that.
Yeah.
All right, Dill, who would you go with for those final 2 forward spots? And then we can kind of hash it out why.
I know this guy could also fall in that category of maybe wanting to see a little bit more from him, but Alex Wenberg, I think, should be protected.
Think about that.
And the one guy I think should absolutely be a lock is Calle Yarncroke. I think he brings
it's the
so
contract
much.
Term. It's just the 1 year left on his contract, which is what gave me pause.
Yeah, I guess I'm not looking at the contract stuff with this.
Whereas Geekie, you've got the team control. I Geekie for the upside for me. Appleton, I figured, is the one you would take issue with. And it goes back to my strategy of you want to, again, keep in mind they can only take one of these players, whether it's forward, defenseman, goalie, whatever. And personally, if it's me running an expansion draft, I want to ensure that if I get a good player taken, it's someone that takes up a lot of salary, that frees up a lot of cap room, and cap space, as we know, still so valuable. I know the Kraken do have plenty of it, but to free up 4.5 in Wenberg's case, 3.9 million in Donskoy's case, or one of the defensemen. I'm just trying to entice the other team, I guess, to clear some salary off the books.
Yeah.
So that would be my pick. Versus Appleton is cheap, and I still believe in the upside there.
Yeah, but then you'll lose somebody like Yarncroke, or you'll lose Ryan Donato, who we've seen how integral he is into this offense for some reason.
All right, well, if you lose Donato, then not protecting Wenberg and Donskoy is irrelevant then.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I think that's
Donato over Appleton, maybe.
I understand your thought process for that. I just don't think it makes sense for this team, given their caps situation and the contracts that they have.
Okay,
they have no big burdensome cap, hit.
You know me, I
like...
could always use some extra cap space freed up. I love that cap space because there's opportunities, there's possibilities.
Yeah, but I also know you wouldn't ever go and give a player a contract, that was going to eat up that cap space. You'll make sure you always have $10 million in cap space just in case you need it, and then you'll never use it.
You never know when the next like Jack Eichel trade target could be available. That's what you use it for. You trade for a generational player, or you sign one if you can.
Yep.
They're on the market more often than you'd think.
Yeah, well, even if you got to wait 3 years and you're out of a job at that point anyway.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. All right, next question from Elias. Elias, any information or analysis of what Max McCormick could do for the Kraken as a fill-in for Appleton? So a little context there. Max McCormick was the corresponding call-up with Mason Appleton being injured in that last game. So yeah, he's been up and practicing with the team. I don't think you probably haven't seen a whole lot of McCormick because he hasn't gotten into a game. I've been the one kind of going to the practices, the morning skates, so I'll kind of take the lead on this one. I think you're going to see, I guess, some similar things to what Appleton has brought so far, and that is a good energy guy. He's always, skating very hard. He's not afraid to, get in the corners, get to those tough areas. He's got a pretty good shot. If he gets to the right space for it, he's a good kind of filling guy. From what I've seen, he doesn't particularly excel at any one thing, that makes you just say, wow, but he does everything pretty darn well. He's well-rounded player, could be a good energy bottom six guy. I don't know if we'll see him in games, but I like what I've seen from him in practices, skates. And I like that he's always, one of the first ones out there, one of the last ones to leave. The work ethic is something that I like.
Yeah, and I haven't really seen any of his plays so far. But I will say, just looking at like his AHL numbers or his NHL career so far he does seem like that kind of fill-in guy. He's maybe the 15th forward on a team, so to speak, right? Where he's the first guy to get called up when there's an injury, but can't quite crack the roster. But yeah, I mean, it just speaks to the depth of the Kraken organization that you can have someone who does have NHL experience, who can come in a situation like this.
Yep. Next, Elias asked another question. Once all the players are back, what players would you see being on the trading block for either a playoff push or trading away if the team isn't in the playoff picture? And I'm going to combine this question with another one from Greg. Do you see the Kraken making a trade if they're in playoff contention in January? If so, who are some targets? So people already want to talk about the trade deadline. I think it's a little early to be talking about this.
It is so early.
Already thinking about the trade deadline. I mean, we don't know where the Kraken, whether it's buyers, sellers, we have no clue.
We haven't
seen,
we haven't seen 2 straight games where the Kraken have used the same forward line. So
as for players that could be targets and kind of what they're missing, I just think we need a better picture of what their needs are, because their needs seem to change from one game to the next. I don't know. As far as, I think we could say, though, if they're not in playoff contention, who they might trade away. And that's because, you kind of plan for these things. Vegas certainly planned for that in their first season. Guys like James Neal, I think, David Perron, these guys on expiring deals where the plan is if you're not in contention, these are the guys you're trading away. Turns out they were very much in contention, so those guys ended up not getting moved. But certain guys, I hate to say it, Mark Giordano probably, if the Kraken just happen to bottom out, he's probably a guy that gets moved. A lot of the pending UFAs, Kalle Yarncroke possibly, because his contract's up at the end of the year. Some of these other guys have term, but you basically look at who's going to be a free agent next season. Maybe one of the defensemen, Carson Soucy, who's been out of the lineup recently, because they never made that defense trade that we thought was coming. And if you're toward the bottom of the standings, maybe you want to trade him, get Will Borgen some ice time, perhaps, do those sort of things.
Yeah, I believe Ron Francis when he said, he was kind of have a more long-term approach to building this team through the expansion draft. And so I don't know that there's really many people that they would be interested in moving, even if the team doesn't look like they're going to be making the playoffs. I agree at some point a defenseman will need to move, just because it's crazy to have, guys like Carson Soucy and Will Borgen just healthy scratched every night. Like that's
too much talent to be sitting in the press box, one of them every game.
Exactly. And then offensively, it's still so hard to say because we've still had so many guys, in and out of the lineup. We've had so many injuries. We still haven't even seen Colin Blackwell come in. Right. He's someone that all of us think can, really do some stuff for this team. Marcus Johansson was doing some stuff for this team early on in the season before his injury. So I don't know that the Kraken would be big buyers. I think probably 25 other teams around the league, they could use a generational number 1 overall center, and they could use 40 goal scorer. But again, everyone kind of needs those. Those are needs that aren't exactly unique to the Kraken. It's just hard for me to comment totally on what I think they should do in a situation like that when we're not even 10 games into the season.
Yep. And I think you may have just answered the next question I had from Scott. He says, hello from Canberra, Australia, which that is cool. We got listeners from Australia commenting in for the Q&A. He said, wondering your thoughts on what player, either a type of player or actual name that we don't have and are missing currently. And that was the answer I was going to give, true number 1 center, like elite defenseman, number 1 defenseman, those kind of things that usually you have to draft in the, in the top 5 for sure, or, acquire, via trade, some other way that the Kraken haven't had a chance to yet. So those would be the needs, but you don't need those guys to win necessarily.
No, we've seen teams, go without them and be just fine. Yeah. And as far as names, I mean, really the only one that has been even talked about trade wise is Jack Eichel. And I don't think the Kraken are in on that. Like that's the other thing, we're talking about, they need kind of these exceptional pieces, right? Because otherwise they have really good depth. They have a good team. You know what I mean? Like, this is a good team. They don't have the prospect pool for it. Like, you'd be trading away picks that you desperately need. This is one of the issues that I think Vegas is going to start running into as these seasons go on is, they really sold out for their first couple years, being buyers at all these trade deadlines and stuff. And then next thing you know, your prospect pool just isn't there, right? They had an advantage over the Kraken in that they had multiple picks in that first year because of the expansion draft prospect. GMs learned, and Ron Francis wasn't able to stockpile that war chest of draft picks, but that really means that the Kraken are not in positions to be buyers, certainly not for anything that would be a rental, like some of the names that generally will pop up every year at the trade deadline. So I know everybody seems to be asking about, what trades they should make and all that stuff, but I would really not be surprised if they were very quiet come trade deadline time.
Agreed. I think that would make the most sense. You got to hang on to those draft picks.
Yeah.
So another couple questions all combined, because we have Kraken, Atoll, and Brian asking for our 3 stars so far this season.
Yeah. Wow. That's a good question. I know Grubauer's been a little up and down, but I do think he's got to be one of them. He's played the vast majority of starts. Don't think that was the plan, but it's what the plan has become. NHL season comes at you fast. I think he's got to be up there for one of them. Brandon Tanev for sure. We talked about him earlier, right? Just the energy he brings on top of the surprise scoring he's brought. He's got to be one of them for me. The third one though is a little bit of a toss up. I want to say Yanni Gord. I want to say Adam Larson. I don't know.
I
It'd
mean, here,
probably be one of them. Yeah, break the tie
yeah.
for me.
Okay. So I had Tanev as the first star.
Mm-hmm.
I want to include Jared McCann. I thought that's a name we haven't seen. I mean, he's still the team's leading scorer, and although he's cooled off a little bit recently, he provided some much needed early offense that, and while Gord was out,
Mm-hmm.
playing in that center role. So I think, recency bias, he probably doesn't, crack the 3 stars, but I think what he did earlier in the season deserves some praise. And Yanni Gord was the other one I had, even though he's only played 4 games. Just wow, he's brought everything he was supposed to. So.
Yeah, it's crazy. Recency bias through 8 games.
I mean, it sure feels like that's a thing, though, man.
10th of the way through the season. It's
Yeah. All right. Next question from NDA Digital. Don't know if touching this is far too early, but how does the coaching staff address or reconcile player expectations and on-ice performance thus far from the expansion perspective, e.g., longer contracts offered to players expected to be leaders affecting line positions? So I think it's an interesting question. Basically talking about, you have this perception that the coaching staff, the GMs have from the expansion draft of, the contracts they gave out to players, where they took them, versus how much ice time they're getting. And, I want to kind of give a better answer than this, but I feel like it's still probably too early, just because there hasn't been really enough of a sample size that I think it's really changing the coaching staff's idea of where to put guys. I think that's just beginning. We're just starting to see that, like with Eberle dropping down to the third line recently, or the one exception is Tanev. Brandon Tanev, I mean, we've all seen what he's done, and I think that has impacted his ice time for sure. He's being kept putting higher and higher in the lineup because, well, we all know why. So I think that would be the biggest exception. What do you think, Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's interesting as I just sorted the team based on average time on ice. Do you know who their leader is? In average time on ice?
Average time on ice. Is it Yanni Gord?
It is Yanni Gord. So that's kind of wild that a forward would lead your team in ice time. It speaks.
That is very unusual. Yeah, for those who aren't, don't check ice time every game like we do. That is very unusual that a forward would lead your team on an average ice time.
Yeah, usually that would be like your top 2 pairing defensemen. Speaks to the depth that they have on defense, that they don't need to rely on just 2 guys really for half a game. Yeah, I mean, it's really, I don't think much changed as far as them being an expansion draft team to just any other team, really, right? I mean, if you go out in free agency and you sign guys like Wenberg or Jaden Schwartz, Grubauer doesn't really matter for the time on ice thing, but when you go out and you sign guys like that, even if you count some of the guys like Larson that they signed to contracts after they picked them, you want them to be, playing appropriate amounts to what you signed them for. And you're always going to start playing them that way. If things don't work out, then they're going to see less and less time in favor of guys that are playing better. That's just kind of standard, I think, for all teams. I don't know that the expansion draft process and maybe this first year of free agency for the Kraken really changes that much from just what you would see regularly.
Yep. I agree. So from Darren, next question. Once Johansson and Blackwell are back, what would your forward lines be? That's a tough one to come up with on the fly. See, I was able to, because I'm the one checking Twitter and getting these questions compiled. So I was able to have my answer pre-prepared. So we'll go through mine. Tell me if you'd make any tweaks, because I was basing mine off kind of the lines we saw at the end of this most recent game that we've watched, the Minnesota game, and things were working so well. So I guess I would start with the first line of Schwartz, Wenberg, and Donskoy, which is what we saw at the end of that game. By the way, I want to add a little something about the first versus the second line. Yanni Gord got a question the other day, a few days ago, where he was asked, what is Cali brought to the first line? And he was kind of confused by it for a second. And he's like, wait, what did you say? And then the reason he was confused is he said, oh, I see. I thought we were the second line. Yanni Gord. So I thought we were the second line, so that's what threw him off. And I realized in the line rushes and warmups, it's that Wenberg line that's going first. So Wenberg's line generally is like the first line. Gord's line is technically the second line. So I've tried to start adjusting that now on our lineup things. But anyway, first line. So Schwartz, Wenberg, and Donskoy. I just, that line looks so good toward the end of the game. I would keep that together, and it all kind of fits. I mean, you've got Wenberg with his passing ability, Schwartz with the finishing ability, and Donskoy with the creativity. I just like all that together. You've talked in the past about Wenberg and Donskoy together and how that works, and putting Schwartz with them only helps.
Yeah.
Yep. So my second line, and this is kind of the shutdown line that the Kraken went with, like against Kaprizov, is Gord, Tanev, and Yarncroke. And oh boy, what a shutdown line that is. Put that against, any of the top forwards in the league. I'd want to see that against McDavid, against the Oilers on Monday. So keep that as your shutdown line. You can give them big minutes against good opposition, and they can score too. Third line I had is McCann, Donato, and Eberle. So this is not one we saw in the Wild game, but Eberle has been down in the third line recently. McCann's still at center. I think having that center depth really helps you. And I just think Donato would fit well with those two. I mean, Donato's going to go to the net. He's going to open up opportunities for McCann, and Eberle, provides you some skill there too. What do you think about that line? Because that one I wasn't entirely sure.
Yeah, that one, I just don't know about Donato centering that line.
No, it'd be McCann centering that.
Okay, because you said his name first, so that's why I was thinking you were
sorry
going left to right like all the other ones.
Left to right. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, so I guess that changes it a little bit. That being said, I've liked McCann a lot more at winger so far this year. So
fair enough.
I might want to see a line that is, geeky centering McCann and Eberle as the third line.
That would be a great line. I did consider that.
Yeah, that's probably what I would do. But
okay,
yeah.
and that's not a bad option. And so then my fourth line was Geeky centering Blackwell and Bastion, and then Appleton potentially swapping in as he gets healthy. But yeah, this line is still what a fourth. Morgan Geeky could be your fourth line center, and maybe it is better to play him at third line center. But I just think the mismatches you're going to be able to get from a line like that, and start Blackwell off there, see how he does, and where you need to move him. So that's kind of my fourth line.
Yeah, and I would make a little bit of adjustments based on my changes to the third line. But yes, it would be some combination of Blackwell, Donato, and probably Nathan Bastion.
Yep, and that's a good fourth line.
Yeah.
All right. One more question we have from Sergeant Pickles on YouTube. Who are the three most improved players like on this homestand compared to how they played on the road trip? And we did see kind of a switch from the Kraken and how they were playing. The end of the road trip was pretty bad. So who are the three most improved players, Dylan? What do you think?
I think Grubauer definitely needs to be in that conversation. He's played so much better at home. Like we said, he looks more confident. He's able to handle the long stretches of, not seeing any shots better. Everything's been better from Grubauer. I think Giordano's been a lot better at home. I think he's kind of settled in. I think they've kind of settled into the idea that maybe his pairing isn't the top pairing for this team. And I think that's situated and he's been better in that position so far. And then, because I won't say like, Yanni Gord just because he barely got any time on that road trip. So that would be like way unfair. But, Jeremy Lauzon's played a lot better these last couple of games. I was
going to mention him. Yeah, Lauzon would be one of my three. He's really kind of stepping into, the role that they gave him the role first. And now he's kind of stepping in and playing into it. But that's good to see.
Yeah, for sure.
The other name I would add is, Hayden Fleury.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, I think that's just a clear one. I think, let's see, I had Fleury, Lauzon, and trying to think of another forward because there were definitely some.
Donskoy's played.
Donskoy,
really well.
That was the next one I was going to say. Yeah, Donskoy, I was thinking, especially defensively too. He had some breakdowns at the end of the road trip, but Donskoy, that's a good one.
Yeah, they all did. The whole team broke down at the end of the road trip.
Yeah. So that's kind of it for the mailbag, except we did have another question that we got on Twitter, on some of the on some of our post-game lives that I think you were going to address.
Yeah. So, as as everybody, certainly those of you who have been joining us for the post-game lives or even watching them the next morning, have, which has been, a lot of you, which both of us, I think, are very happy with how all that's been going on. But one of the themes has been RJ going to all these home games, whether it's via, tickets or press box access. And, I'm just hanging out here at home, so to speak, and lots of questions about why that is. Accusations of RJ being just too selfish with
RJ. When are you going to let Dylan have the press pass? When are you going to let him join you?
Yeah, exactly. So figured we'd address this. Knew we were going to have to at some point. Plans changed a little, which is why we're addressing it now and not sooner. As many of you guys know, we are not native to Seattle. We are from Southern California, and just kind of due to several things, mostly personal reasons, I haven't been able to, fully make the move up to Seattle. So I'm actually, like, right now, this set that you're used to seeing from me is here in Southern California for me. So I'm not in Seattle, so it's a little hard to take the press box access when you're, 1,800 miles away, or what it is. So, I know we've been kind of talking like I've been up there and stuff, and I've made references to several things up there, not trying to deceive anybody with that, because I have far more experience really up in Seattle than RJ ever did before he made his move.
This is true.
Yeah, because my grandparents have lived in Washington State 25 of my 27 years, and every year at least once I'd go up there, usually for the whole month of July. So I have lots of experience up in Washington State and in Seattle and stuff like that. And so, just because I know maybe for some of you there might be some funny feelings about this, I figured I'd give you two quick, like, my Seattle sports stories. And just from my time going to Seattle games, particularly Mariner games, because usually I'm up there in the summer, and my grandmother is a huge baseball fan, so I'd always go with her. First one I'll talk about, and I wasn't able to dig this shirt out of the garage to show people, but those, like, player shirt jersey things where it's like a t-shirt, but it's got the player's name and number on the back, the jersey, if you will.
Yep, the jersey.
One of the ones I really wore out, and that's why it's in a box in the garage and not, like, in my wardrobe still, is a Seattle Mariners Justin Smoke jersey. And I bought that at a Tacoma Rainiers game that I was at. Went to a lot of Tacoma Rainiers games, a lot of Mariner games growing up. And I bought that, and oh my gosh, did I take some flack from the other people at this Rainiers game for buying this Justin Smoke jersey. Now, in my mind, he was the, switch-hitting power first baseman that was going to really, take off for us. Turns out he did that in Toronto and not in Seattle. I think he hit like 200 his whole time in Seattle. But I took a bunch of flack from all these other people buying jerseys because, they had just gotten in the Justin Smoke ones, and they had just gotten in the Dustin Ackley jerseys, and those things were flying off the shelf, and I was the only one buying a Justin Smoke one. Everybody else was buying Dustin Ackley, and they're like, "Oh, you fool." Well, Justin Smoke lasted a little bit longer with the Mariners than Dustin Ackley. I'm not sure either of these jerseys are anything we would want to wear proudly right now. But I will bring that up just because that is a deep cut Seattle sports thing. And the other thing is, if you're on YouTube, you can see it now. I'm holding up a baseball, and this is from my first Seattle Mariners baseball game that I ever went to in Seattle. I was almost 11, 3 weeks away from turning 11, so I was 10 years old, and sitting near the Mariners dugout. And in the pregame, pitchers warming up before they head out there, warming up with the catcher, who was Stan the Man Wilson. If you're a Seattle sports fan, you know who this was. And at the end of warm-ups, as they're going out to take the field, obviously they're the home team, they're pitching first, right? He turns around, there's a big line of kids. I'm there. I'm not like even really paying attention to what's happening because I was just taking in the ballpark and everything for the first time. Singles me out, tosses a ball up to me. I catch it, which was very impressive because I didn't have glasses at the time. So I didn't do much of that back then. But I caught it, and I caught this ball, and he then jogs out onto the field to play in that game. That game was the May 4th, 2005 game where he, tore his ACL and really like chewed up his knee, and in a lot of ways really ended his long illustrious career with the Mariners. He did play after that, but that was really the the beginning of the end there. So that's kind of my unique part of Seattle sports history, and this ball, being a part of that. This is the last warm-up pitch, before that injury that he threw to a kid, and I was that kid. So yeah, I know the area, I know stuff like that. I do have experience rooting for the Seattle sports team. So just because I'm not up there right now doesn't mean I'm not, still kind of plugged in that way. And I will be making regular trips up there. I'm coming up mid-November for a while. We'll definitely make sure to let everybody know. We can maybe try to set up some fan stuff. And then I'll be coming up probably every other month throughout the course of this season. So but yeah, that's kind of what's going on. Again, it wasn't totally the plan. That's why we haven't really been open about this. But again, it wasn't because we were trying to deceive anybody. It was just things just didn't end up working out right now. So, but that's that.
Yep. Good stories, Dylan. I still love those stories every time. I've definitely heard them a few times. Knowing you for as long as I have, they never get old. Especially that one about Stan the Man. So, thanks for telling everyone that. And I'm looking forward to your next visit up here. We're gonna have a good time.
Yeah, and you should be able to work something out press box wise. It seems like so.
Yeah,
I'll be taking care of everybody. Don't worry. But that is going to be it for this episode of the podcast. Thanks everybody for joining us as always. Busy week of Kraken hockey ahead. Got several games in this upcoming week. Obviously Rangers for tonight for us. Obviously everybody else is hearing this on Monday. So for Monday, you got the Oilers game. That game's at 6:30. Then hosting the red hot Buffalo Sabres Thursday night. That's a 7:00 game, I'm pretty sure. And then got Arizona Coyotes next Saturday. So, if the Sabres come in and do what they've been doing to everybody, maybe we can rebound against Arizona next Saturday. And that's also a 7:00 start in Arizona, though. So that's the schedule for this upcoming week. Should be good. Let's hope Kraken keep this ball rolling. And we'll see you all next time.